No, so we're gonna start right now. First of all, I would like to thank organizers of this forum, and of course I would like to thank people who made a great effort to came here to talk about problems they think are important. And of course I would like to thank everybody who managed to come here during those hot days in Moscow. Despite the fact that we are almost dying here with plus 35 and so on, which is quite unusual for this period of the time, we still could gather together to talk about things we think are relevant to our current situation. So the topic of this roundtable was chosen in terms of communities, cities, and technologies. And this triangle is quite important now because during many years world urban studies were obsessed with the idea of community. We used to think about the city in terms of communities. Community is kind of our ontological core. We always talk about communities need this, community need that, and this urban community and that urban community. We never ask ourselves actually what makes community a community. We never asked ourselves how actually we recognize them, how we make them visible, how we can be so sure that we are talking about communities and not just random groups or cohorts of people involved in some kind of everyday practices. So in this triangle between city, community and technology, community was always a privileged angle. The idea of this roundtable was actually to switch a little bit the focus of our attention, to move from community to a question what actually makes community visible. Because as we are talking about cities as spaces of visibility, spaces where different groups and subjects are relevant and visible to each other, how can we actually understand what makes them visible, what makes them relevant, what makes them subjects? So let me introduce my colleagues who came here. First of all, Ella Overcliff, and I hope to know a little bit more about what is Nightmare of Amsterdam. For me it's a new thing, so thanks a lot. And José González Marandi, film director, who came here and he will talk about a lot of interesting things that he's doing. I've already read about it. I also want to know more a little bit about those communities. With Dmitro Zayets, who is fellow colleague of me, who is also sociologist and social scientist, but he's also part of partisaning movement, which I already know about a lot, so I want to know some more. And Luca Palmas, who is a professor from Genova, yes. In Russia we used to call it Genoa. I have no idea why, but yeah, Universität Genovese. And myself, I'm Victor Wachstein. I'm professor of social sciences here at British University in Moscow. So let's start with Luca. Could you please talk a little bit more about your projects and about your experience of working with city community, urban community, and these technological things that make them visible?
So, did you hear me?
Yeah? Yes.
Okay, great. So, thanks for the invitation. And the point is, what is a community, and which is the relation between city and the idea of community. So, and city is also an infrastructure. City is a concentration of fights, of struggle, of capitals. And when I'm here and I look, for example, to that picture, I ask myself, which kind of community can be lived inside that kind of city? So it's a community of power, it's a community of money, it's a community of business. And there's two sociologists coming from France that did a really interesting study about the fact that rich people are really communitarian. So they used to stay together, they share houses, they're really communist rich people. So they speak about free market and they have a narrative about market and competition, but they are really socializing lifestyle. So there's a lot of community. When we have this world of community, I think that we have to think about what is the common. So that picture is really interesting because when Catholic Church arrived in Latin America, in order to let the poor indigenous people really little, they used church. And the church has to be really rich, with a lot of gold, really big. And you had to feel really really little man, you know. So I think that this kind of city that urban planners are producing everywhere in the world has an ideological power, the power to let feel the people really little, really impossible to do something with their life, with their body, with their social interaction, and so on. So what is the common? A community, it comes from the idea of the common. So which kind of common we have, and what is the relevant common, what is the crucial common, is a point of that Bourdieu was calling about symbolic capital. I mean, the common is the art, the common is the power, the common is the culture, the common is the love, the common is the religion. It's a process of conversion. So when we speak about communities, of course, cities are organized through social groups with some kind of belongings. And the point about visibility is really crucial because, visibility is, as Foucault told us, is a technology of power. If I'm corrupt, I don't want to be visible, you know? Maybe if I have the power to transform the corruption in something really important and visualized as symbolic important, so I can visibilize the corruption, as the Catholic Church, for example, visibilized during the Baroque period, visibilized the luxury, you know? So city is this, is a permanent space in which the urban life many times is fighting against urbanistic planners. Urban life is constructed around the idea of the anonymous possibility of moving inside the city, about the free decision on people with whom I can enter in relation and in social relation. And the urbanistic view on the city is just construct plans, construct point trajectories, construct corridors, I can say this, paths. So we can imagine urban life against a urbanistic view about what a city has to do. And technology is really important, because technology is at the same time a device of control, is a device of fights, of struggle. I was living in Tunisia in the last year. I was doing a research and a film about young youth in the Arab Spring. And so the media were totally concentrated in the hands of the family of Ben Ali, the dictator of Tunisia, and his really little circle, the women of Ben Ali, whose name was Leila Trabelsi. Now they flew away in Saudi Arabia. And so there was no space. There was really technology of control on internet, control of social network, and so on and so on. And people use the social networks in order to construct another space of visibility, another space of belongings, another space of struggle, in order to construct another form of the city. So after in Italy we say that le ciambelle non escono mai col buco. It means that when you want to do a cookie, the result is not really what you wait for, but so we know it was the end of the Arab Spring, not in Tunisia, but in Libya and in Syria and Morocco, in Algeria, and so on and so on. So I think, and I will stop here, but when you ask me what is a community, I will say that we have to question ourselves about which is the common inside the community.
Thank you so much. And I have a question, but I will ask a little bit later. And thank you very much for this food metaphor. I think that idea of cookie is exactly what we need right now. Let me switch to José González and ask actually the same question about technology of visibility, about what makes community a community, and about its relations with the city.
Yes, thank you for the invitation, first of all. And Well, what makes a community visible or invisible? I always have thought me that I make cinema. It's depend of the eye who is looking. You know, we have worked with Luca in Barcelona with like poor communities, gang members, youth from the street. But studying these communities, working with them, I found that they are not very different that communities like here, no? Here we are in a community of people who wants to think a city, and the question is if they want to make the city for the people or they want to make the city for making money. I see here a lot of this thinking the city in order to take profit of it, and I haven't seen where is the people, what do you do with the people who lives in the city. So visible or invisible communities depends on the eye that looks. Every community, as Lucas said, has two possibilities: to stay in the dark or to show themselves. I think communities always need both things. Sometimes you need to control the image, sometimes you need to stay in the dark. It depends what you want to do. But in the communities we have worked with, that are poor communities, they have also this doubt what to do with their image. But the image is something that you have two choices. You produce your image, or the others produce the image for you. And of course, technology is through that a lot. In this place, we have seen thousands of cameras. There is thousands of screens. Everybody wants to control the image. The control of the image is very important. And the power, it's if you control it or not. If you construct your own tale of who you are. And of course, what makes a community for me is what we have in common, what we want to join. The communities can join money, can join ideology, can join faith. No, we have three kind of communities, and of course, as much they join together, they have an interest in common, more powerful they are. And the technology of visibility it's something crucial. I mean, which political party, which group of power doesn't have a Twitter account, a Facebook account, who controls the televisions, who controls the newspapers? So visibility is something crucial. And of course, we are always like trying to think how these communities that live in the city and they in theory make insecurity or they produce crime, how can we control them? But we forget that the crime is everywhere. Crime is in the highest parts of the society, in the governments. Crime is in the police. Crime is in the university. Crime is in the low classes of the society. So I don't know. It's very difficult. Urban life is a mystery. It's something that grows every day and every night goes down. Well, the mayor of the night city. But I don't know. It's something that we can keep on talking.
Thank you so much. It's interesting that you asked this question, what actually is a common in community, and you got an answer: money, power, or faith. And actually three major resources. Ideology is something between money and faith, I believe, and power. Yes, so probably ideology is even more important here. But what is interesting, talking about ideologies, you're in Moscow, which is a city of hipster urbanism, which is a place where people are making money by making the city for communities, and community became a very capitalized concept. If you want to make some kind of difference, you can just say we work for community, and despite the fact either this community exists or not, but pointing it out and making it visible, it's a great business. So it's a short apropos thing here. And another very interesting story that you told, and I can see it, this correlation with your narrative, about this distinction between urban life and urban planning. And urban, usually visibility, something that makes visible, something that makes it distinctible, was always on the side of urban planning. because for urban planners, for politicians, for for people who make decisions, to make urban life visible is already to impose some kind of power over it. And what we are trying to do here actually is turning this distinction, turning this opposition, and see what kind of resources to be visible urban life has in itself. Can we actually take this anti-Foucault movement and see what kind of technology of visibility on the other side? Not on the side of the power, but on the side of people, on the side of community. Because exactly, if you do not produce image of yourself, some other will produce this image. And so as soon as we're talking about dark side and dark time, I'm completely intrigued with this idea of nightmare. Ella Overclift.
Well, a lot of people are, and it's actually all over the world now. The eyes are on us. For me, I am not the night mayor, but I'm the project manager of we are an NGO. And currently the night mayor is in Colombia doing the same thing as I am now to talk about it. And well, in short, what we do, we are the connection between the municipality, the business owners and communities, like residents, young creative collectives and other groups. And we advise the municipality about nightlife, about it also has to do with urban planning, like how do nightclubs stimulate a certain area, stuff like that. And but also it also has to do with safety, of course, and we call it the upside and the downside of the night. And yeah, so that's our work field actually, what I work in.
Could you tell a little bit more about what you're working in? Because actually, what does it mean, this nightlife in your optics?
Yeah, it's about the economical and cultural value.
So because for us, nightlife is to get drunk during night somewhere in Moscow. So somewhere between Moscow and St. Petersburg, something like this. And
okay, well maybe you can tell me, because I don't know much about Moscow nightlife yet. But I'm going tonight. So, but is there you have like bars and discotheques to get drunk and to dance? But do you also have like a more creative nightclub community actually? Is that people are like light artists and also DJ, but dancers, other artists that all come together and create this in nightlife? That's what we make make the difference between like getting drunk in nightlife, and that's a part of going out, but there's also a creative nightlife that is really valuable to a city for people to express themselves. Is that here in Moscow as well? Like, do you know that? Not much. Okay. Well, there's what the nightmare comes in, to stimulate
in Moscow,
that.
I think that it would be really difficult to draw the distinction between just going out to get drunk and going out in a more creative way. Because it can start with going out in a more creative way and then you get drunk.
Yes, no, of course, you can do it both. But we look at it like well, I can also use the word mainstream and underground. Maybe that to make it more clear. But like you have, for instance, in Amsterdam on the big squares, you have the big clubs where all the tourists go. And they don't really care what kind of music there is. They just want to get wasted. And then, that's what I mean with like getting drunk. And they're not there for the creative vibe or the community vibe that is there. They're just there to get wasted, and it doesn't matter what is going on there or how the club looks. That's the difference that I'm trying to make.
Thank you. And I still have a lot of questions actually about this nightlife story.
Okay.
I hope that we will be able to discuss it. But going back to this question of communities, is there some kind of solid community behind it, which said, okay, we need an NGO that will provide our vision of night city or something like this, or it was just spontaneous movement and that's like a wave of something?
No, it wasn't a spontaneous movement. Actually, it developed over the years. But I really would like to say something about the urban life versus urban planning, because I don't know if you know about the Holzmarkt area in Berlin. Okay, yes. Well, that's really the perfect example for how nightlife influence urban development, because there's this area near the Spree River in Berlin, there was a nightclub, and it had to go. The government has some ideas about urban planning, and they wanted to build a media spray, like all big media offices. Profit. They want to build for profit. And the people from the nightclub, they built such a huge community, and they protested. They went out on the street, and they managed to get a fund and get the money to build their own property. And now the whole urban planning, the media idea of the government is gone, and they're building their own bottom-up creative community with all sustainable land and a theater and a club and everything there. So that's how powerful the community of a nightlife can be, and has influence during the day as well.
Great. So night is not a time of invisible and dark.
No.
It's
Not
just
only.
another side of visibility. It's interesting that we are discussing this media story because talking about faith, money, and
Media.
power, we also have to talk about management and attention, because it's about what kind of attention can you grasp, can you get in order to move forward, what you actually want to move forward in terms of urban life and urban planning. I think that this distinction between urban life and urban planning is now actually a little bit vague. Now we will have to discuss more. Either we keep it in a very Marxist term as something that is a power on one side and people on the other, or we will have to reshape it somehow in the future. But first I would like to pass word to Dmitro Zayets, who will talk a little bit more about, I guess, Russian context.
Да, спасибо большое.
Thank you so much. I would like to welcome you here. And let me start from those questions Victor Priley sent to us. They are quite general and not at all theoretical. And let me say from the outset, what do I think about the visibility as a philosophical category? And this idea is based on the notion of the wide egalitarian participation. And the community may influence a lot, and they might be watched, and they sometimes people from outside do not know sometimes what is going on. And if we talk about the common values, it's worthy to mention that we have to be provided an access to some space of communication to all layers of the population. And really, there are various types of visibility. It could be a physical one and representative one, and it could be a narrative one, a sound one, and represented in the public sphere. And we also have a cognitive type of visibility, or sensor type of visibility. And it should be perceived by the general public quite pertinently. And this cognitive visibility is something which is essential for the artists, for the urban activists, if they want to draw the attention of the general public. And I would like to say a few words about the social technology. And it's a surprise. Surprise, which is designated to reflect some joint surprise, and thus drawing attention to the actions of a specific group or a community. And the mechanisms of surprise relies on some kind of a template when the norms and rules are violated, when something unusual happens in the space and in the time. When we talk about the public space, we're supposed to speak about the public time. And so templates do not work. And modern artists and people from partisaning, from my association, try to rely on the tactics of surprise. And if we talk about the Western context, what is going on at the public level? sometimes artists provide some kind of a destructive signal, some kind of a radical signal, and thus they want to send a signal about their presence in the city. And the partisaning was quite a successful movement, and we decided to operate on some other areas to provide unsanctioned urban development. We started working in the nighttime. We started beautifying the bus stops, putting some marks on the road, and that was just perceived as a positive pulse and impetus, and partisaning managed to become a very famous initiative, and their activity fits onto the general ideology of the serious beautification of the town or city, like we do in Moscow nowadays. And that's how it all happened. And that's the community has become visible at the urban level. And as to the public attention, so we have to identify two factors. Everyone understands what is going on as within our movement, and another factor. We sometimes provide the asymmetric approach to the focus of attention and object of attention, and we provide some kind of a consolidating effect. And we do realize that we are a part of the audience, a part of spectators, and thus we realize what is going on, and therefore some sports games are so popular when people jointly and are just watching something and have the same feelings. And so we have to subdivide the category of the visibility of the public attention, the collective surprise, and these are really very essential components which make a community a community. And there should be the public vision, some kind of a cohesion and alignment at the level of the society. And it might be there, but never developed. And we do it all otherwise. Do I understand it correctly that in this model, the non-public communities are not perceived as communities? Yes, to some extent, it is true. And in the Russian language, so we have some kind of is Gemeinschaft as Gesellschaft, and we have some kind of language tricks there. When we speak about the common society, it's a Gemein. It's that we are all aligned. And when we are talking about the city cyclists, they have much in common. As to hipsters, they might have a smoothie, a beard, and people get in touch with one another, and therefore we come across the problem of co-communication. Sometimes they have nothing in common, but they do communicate. And we have a roundtable discussion. It's our common table. And as to the urban community, so we are talking about two layers of that community. People having nothing in common and people having all in common. And we try to use these notions, and we try to use these language tricks for the decision makers. So just have a look. These people have much in common, or these people do not have much in common. They do not always differentiate. And so if we define some kind of an urban community, it's an oxymoron. Уважаемые,
The next
если у вас есть какие-то замечания, комментарии,
who says to Lucas first statements. Okay, because I actually want to know a little bit more about your experience of working with communities. What kind of communities you used to work with, what kind of goals you have, what kind of structure of this community, what makes them visible at the end, and what part of them is still in the dark. which is probably the most interesting question, because dark side of community is actually what we were supposed to call this round table, I guess, but that metaphor came later. Thanks for you. Okay, so shall we start with Jose?
Well, the communities I've been working in Barcelona, I've been working with communities that they deal drugs, but in a very low level of dealing. I mean, not big mafia, but small smugglers that sell drug in little portions. And then I've been working with what we call gangs in Spain, but we don't have to think about this kind of gangs we see in television like in the United States or Central America. The gangs in Spain, they come from they're originally from New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles, the mother of these gangs, but they don't. In Spain, it's very difficult to carry a gun. It's the criminality is one of the lowest in the world. It's very difficult to not just carry a gun. It's very difficult to buy a gun in Spain. It's almost only like big mafia or police or militaries have weapons. So, and also now I'm working with what we call the squad movement in Barcelona, which is quite big, like the social movements of anarchists and what it's called black blocs and all this kind of stuff. As you see, there are communities that belong like to the, I don't know, the, how do you call that in English? People who is against the system, no, not against this, that are out of the system in some way, or they fight the system. The system, as we know, is the system of political power, the system of what is our capitalist system. What we found in all these communities is that police is always following them because they are like dissidencia. How do you say in English dissidencia? Dissidencia is a Russian word maybe. So there is always a fight against dissidencia from the power. But of course, the squad movement is very different from the other movements because there is a movement that it comes from the university. It's prepared in order to have a discourse, and they want to be visible because now the mayor of the city of Barcelona, for example, when she was younger, she became to that movement. So it's a movement now that is fighting a lot in the city because it's urban planning. It's like the mean of this movement is stop the urbanists to make the city for the people, but let's share the construction of the city together. Stop asking the citizen, not asking the citizen. The government doesn't ask the citizen what they want. It's just you just have this and you take it. The thing is not. We have to share the construction of the city. We have to share, decide what kind of city we want to live in. So this is very important in a place like this because I think it's far away from what is proposed in this forum nowadays. If you go upstairs, you just see things that to make money out of the city. Nobody will ask the people from the city, what kind of city do you want to live? Do you want to be in a city full of tourists? For example, now in Barcelona is a major problem, the thing of the tourism. There are a lot of neighborhoods that people from the neighborhood have to move out because the rent of the apartments and the flats is very expensive because tourism is coming and buying everything. So what kind of city we want for the future? A city for the neighborhood or a city for the people who wants to make money of the city, out of the city?
Thank you. Actually, it's interesting about Barcelona's story because Barcelona is a major capital of two things. First, urban planning, because we all, of course, know the story of Barcelona's planning and so on. Yep. Now it's became some kind of big star. And another is actually a capital of anarchism, POM and so on. Actually, I think that's talking about this urban life and urban planning as a position in Barcelona is probably metonymy of urban life and urban planning at the same time. But what actually is the place of universities? Because you just said that all those communities, they came from universities.
No, the anarchist movement.
The anarchist movement being prepared, very discursive and outspoken. And so when you're working with gangs today, can you say that it's still some kind of trace of university education on this? Or it's totally different marginal communities now?
In gangs, you mean?
Yes.
Well, I start to work with gangs with people from the university. I work a lot with sociologists and an anthropologist. Nowadays, it's weird because it's the issue gang in Spain has have lost interest. The police has made a lot of persecution on them, but they were a very poor community. I said before, what makes a community going together, no? And I think ideology, faith, and money. They don't have a common ideology. When they tried to make a common ideology in the United States back in the 90s, in New York, the Latin people, the mayor of New York, Giuliani, no? What's the name? Giuliani, he really persecuted them because they tried to become more ideology, like fighting for the rights of the Latino community, etc. So they stopped that because they knew if they changed from being just a criminal small gang in order to become a political thing, they will be stronger. And in theory, they share crime and money, but they don't, because I don't know, we're working with the police of Catalonia during this research with Luca, and from the same police said that the 0.001 crime committed in Catalonia was committed by the gangs. So what they did is they have a communication of fear. What they show is that they are mean, they can be criminals, but it's not true because they just commit crime in between them. And well, it was an issue for a while, and media loves to have something to talk about in order to maybe not talk about real issues, but nowadays it has been going down. And about drug dealers, well, they're still there. It's the gypsy community of Spain. And not all of them, of course, are in the drug business, but it's something that is always there. But as we know, drugs come from where they come. The big money of the drug is not in their pockets; it's in the bank in Switzerland. So, when we talk about these communities, I think that what they have is a lack of opportunities, a lack of education, a lack of becoming something else than what they are.
Thanks. It's actually this story of toy criminalitet in Catalonia, this quasi-criminals. Reminds me of the story of Tierra Libre, which used to be a Catalonian separatist organization. Compared to ETA, during 25 years they killed only 7 people, and all of them were members of Tierra Libre. So it's probably a typical Catalonian story, I guess. So, Luca, would you like to add something about this research that you're doing together? What's actually the design of it and what idea of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to assume that city is an animal, so it's permanently growing, evolving, starting from the marges. Before the city was like full of empty space. When we look, for example, to the birth of gangs, the first studies of gangs in Chicago in the early 90s, gangs, it was developed in the interstices of the city. Now the city have no more interstices, so the city are full of spaces, are full of infrastructures, and marginal subjects try to live in these new spaces that were performing city. So when I was in Barcelona, for example, and there was a permanently produced fear about this subject gang as monster, the accused power did to gangs was about the intensive use of the space. It's really interesting because which is the ideologies behind this idea of intensive use of the space. The ideology is that the citizen has not to stay in the space. He can be a consumer. It can stay in front of a schermo, you say pantalla, a screen, but it cannot stay in the space. You know, you can buy, you can sell, you can move, you can pass, but you are not allowed to stay without doing nothing in a single space. So gangs were really interesting because they tried to live that kind of city that you can find in Moscow, you can find in Barcelona, you can find in Milan, you can find in Paris, you can find everywhere. So it's really the globalization of the same mold of city. But people in the marge try to do something with the infrastructure in which that kind of generation has to grow up. So stay in the space, live in the space, resignificate this space. How can, for example, organize parties in a square that is not organized to be a party square? So, and when we look to social movements are mainly coming from middle class, from people that went to university, had some kind of cultural capital, and so on. So we can see the same effect, the fact to stay. For example, it starts in Tunisia, and then we have Indignados in Spain, and then we have Gizzi Park in Istanbul, and then we have Zuccotti Park in New York, and now we have Nuit Debout in France. What this kind of people do? They go to the central square and they say, we live here, we camp here, we are not consumer, we don't like market economy, although we are in a market economy, so we use all the resources that we have in a market economy, and we try to resignify. For example, in Place de la République in Paris, I was doing an ethnography in May in Place de la République. One of the main games, it was the fight against advertising. So how we can organize in little community in order to go to the metro or to the big screen of the city and to disrupt advertising. So for example, if you have to sell a perfume, you have to show a really good woman. And so they go to this big advertising, say, but it doesn't exist, that woman is just a hologram. Why you have to fit in this image? So it's really interesting that although we have that kind of city, city is really a living animal. And what you were telling before about the resistance of the city clubbers and the city entrepreneurship to a type of reconstruction, it's a demonstration that it's a permanent struggle. So it's an equilibrium of powers and resources, and the history never ends. Of course, fears is a permanent resource that power use in order to demobilize ourselves. And we can see now with ISIS and so on and so on. But it's really interesting, for example, that in the French case, youth communities didn't get inside this discourse about fear. So you had Bataclan, you had Charlie Hebdo, but at the same time you had a lot of social things that happen in the street. So the history is always something open that people write with their hands, with their minds.
Yes, Ella, would you add something? Yeah, please.
Well, it's we are currently working on this project called Enter the Void. And this is really what you're saying, that like everything is structured. We have these city molds, you know, where how can you, what you said, the power of surprise, where you work with, we use the word serendipity. How can you use, like, when you are in the public space where you're not allowed to stay, but if you want to stay, and what can happen if you stay, you know, what can happen organically and with surprises. So this is a project I work on with the city of Riga, Berlin, Amsterdam and Budapest. And it's about how can young creative people use the public space in a non-commercial way. So we're now setting up these projects in all of these cities to see how you can move within these structures, molds of cities, and create a place to stay. How you want it, like bottom up. That's a really interesting project.
Thanks. It's actually so interesting, because when we thought about this roundtable, we were talking about technology is replacing politics, because now it's not on the street anymore, it's in the Facebook. Nothing like that. Absolutely, because when I'm listening to you, I understand that fear and resistance are still major invariants in urban life. And no technology, no social network, no Facebook, nothing like that can ever replace straight political action in terms of making community visible. So if it's alive, it comes out during day or night, with a weapon or without. That's how it makes it visible, not through Facebook or social network. Dmitro, would you like to... Хотели бы вы добавить что-то, потому что ваше развлечение...
Would you add something, because your difference between the object of attention and focus of attention is very important. Well, somehow I misused it in my previous statement. Our colleagues discussed their experience of dealing with communities. It is strongly linked to the way you draw on this boundary line. We have 7 minutes. You can add something. In fact, I wanted to discuss my experience of building communities. Maybe we'll discuss it later. I wanted to say an important thing, that visibility as a result of public attention may be a resource for community, and it may be an obstacle for its further development. It's a brief story. I'm linked not only to this partisan urban community, but I'm also linked to a small community of 1 yard in Rostov region. It's a periphery district of Moscow, where this visibility prevented to organize an excellent day of neighbors, after people learned that the management company which managed the local houses was surprised, and they were surprised to find in an obsolete and outdated garden yard, they were surprised to find flower beds and small tents. Well, and that management company removed all this stuff and destroyed all the infrastructures created with these people. And it happened because they were fearful of mass media that was going to attend this event. Such drama, the Day of Neighbor was ruined, because they prepared other people for this Day of Neighbor, which was planned with a major neighbor-like dinner. The symmetry of the focus of attention, the object itself is important, is a resource of solidarity. It unites, rallies people into a community. And our participation in public sphere, the visibility is important both for the subject and object of attention. It changes, converts any interaction into a drama, any action into performance. And at the same time, those who are audience, who receive a message, they're always changed. They're also changed. And they acquire a new thing. And this community of people becomes a viewer and becomes a community, among other things. Thank you. Thanks a lot. I started in English and I will finish in Russian. First of all, thanks to everyone who joined us here and shared their experience. The complete failure to discuss our technology of visibility in a direct sense of the word as the technology of visibility, which becomes visible thanks to technology progress. This failure is quite illustrative, and to a certain extent I am happy of this failure, because technology becomes much stronger when it's used in a metaphoric sense of view rather in a direct sense of word. However, the discussion of the links between the city and the technology is by no means at its end. I liked very much some of the topics that you touch upon in discussions. Further on at this forum, we'll be able to continue our discussion, and once again, thanks to everybody.